There's no place to hide, sorry. And, you know, when something happens, and it happens in aviation all the time, I am guilty. What do you do? Over to you.
I'd say first you own it. So
There.
you don't try to dodge the bullet. You don't say, hey, try to make excuses. This is why I did this. This is why I didn't do this. It's, hey, this is the situation. This is why I made the decision I made, and I made the wrong decision, and I apologize for it. Here's how I'm going to rectify that, and here's how I'm not going to repeat that mistake in the future. Just going back to what he was talking about there earlier with premeditating. So there's a saying we have in the F-18 community, really, there's no original thoughts that occur after takeoff. So if you haven't thought about each individual avenue, or if this, then that kind of a situation, you're going to quickly run into or run out of time to make decisions. So we'll sit there and you know, as dumb as it sounds, go through scenarios in our head of, you know, if I'm faced with this, what am I going to do? And there's times when you haven't thought of that, and that's when things go south. So really, I can kind of go with a specific example of where I almost screwed up majorly. We were in actually Hawaii doing a close air support or CAS exercise. So we're sitting there talking to the JTECs, and they're trying to get us to bomb a piece of volcano there. So really not a definable target. So what they're going to do is they're going to shoot a smoke out of I think it was a smoke grenade, and they're going to have us try to bomb near the smoke for practice purposes. So we're circling overhead there. I think it was 12 to 15,000 block, and they call the smoke out, and I'm able from 8 miles away and holding to see this speck of smoke, which never happens to me. Usually you can only see it when you get closer. So I see it and I'm like, oh my God, there's the smoke. I need to make sure that I note exactly where that is. There's a capability where you can basically look outside of your cockpit and drop a mark onto that smoke that you can reference and then target. So at range, I make the decision to go ahead and drop a designation on that smoke. Well, we all know that smoke drifts over time with wind. So as we're coming in and I'm actually on my attack profile, I still see the smoke, but it's a little bit further away from where I initially thought it was. But I'm supposed to bomb the smoke, so I roll in, and then something just doesn't feel right. Basically, I'm like, this doesn't meet muster here. So I do the safe thing. I don't drop. Basically, abort the run, come back, and no harm, no foul. Everything's recorded, so they're looking at the tapes, and they're like, oh my God, you almost dropped on the friendlies, because the way the wind direction was, that smoke plume had actually traveled overhead towards the friendlies. So in the debrief, do I try to tear up my tapes? Oh, there's no evidence? No, I'll own it. Like, hey, listen, this is why I made that decision. It was the wrong decision, and I know in the future I'm not going to drop a designation until I'm much closer to the target. So I would say owning it, and then just admitting your mistake, and then how you're going to fix that in the future.
All good thoughts. There go I. Captain Klopfer.
Yeah. Again, piggyback on everyone. Own your mistake. John Elway, quarterback, Denver Broncos. He once said, he's like, in football, think about your issue for 5 seconds and then move on. Now, putting this into a military perspective, not literally take 5 seconds, but you can't dwell on it, because the more you dwell on it, it's going to affect the next decision that you have to make, and you're going to be more emotionally based rather than logically based when it comes to decision making. So you mess up and you say, well, if I do this again, then this might happen, and I don't want that to happen. And that's not the decision. That's not the decision-making process you should have. It should be, okay, this is what I messed up. This was the right answer. Press on, and we'll debrief on it later.
Lieutenant Melendez, please.
So 2 points. One's very simple. It's we're always taught, don't be the senior man with a secret. So if you do screw up, or you mess up, your guys mess up, anyone messes up, just make sure that your boss knows that, and then you make sure that your boss tells his boss. That's the 1 point. And then the second point that both of them kind of touched on, but I just want to go a little deeper, is with the debriefing. So SWO boss sent out a couple of sound shipboard operating principles, and then a couple of tools to help those. And one of those was PBED, plan, brief, execute, debrief. And the point for debriefing and learning from things that happens to make sure that you actually have good inputs for your debriefs and things that are actually palpable. So like, do this better. is not a good debriefing point. And so you want to actually bring some meat to the debrief. So make sure that if you're having a debrief, it's actually worth having and not just a waste of everyone's time.
Let me ask Lieutenant Commander Stoner, please.
Well, I already talked about one of my mistakes earlier, but agree with everything everyone said about owning it. Another sea story, because that's what we like to do in the Navy, is tell sea stories. I showed up to my first ship, ready to roll. I'm hungry to learn. I want to get qualified. I want to be the best ship driver in the Navy. I want to get my officer of the deck letter. I'm super excited. Work super hard, and my captain ended up asking me to stay on for my second tour there. And so I'm thinking I'm going to be the senior divo on the ship. I've got it made. I'm going to have my first division officer tour. I was the repair division officer, so I worked for the damage control assistant. So I'm expecting to have another officer work for me. I'm like, it's going to be awesome. All I'm going to have to do is stand watch. They're going to do everything for me. Captain trusts me. Well, change of command happens. We get a new captain. And my chief transfers. I get a new chief. And all the way up until then, did I make mistakes? Yes, I made many mistakes. Report to your first ship. Make sure you're either wearing whites or SDBs. Don't show up in wrinkled khakis. That's the chief's mess will never let you live that down, for those of you going to a ship. Also, don't skip the nav brief to go to the gym. Just only the SWOs in here are laughing. I can explain that afterwards. But my chief, for the most part, would grab me by the ear, not literally the first chief, and he would be like, "Ma'am, we need to go talk," and he would give me guidance and explain what I needed to do, and how I was making mistakes. Second chief, not so great. New captain, chief screws up, division screws up, I screw up, and all of a sudden, I don't have it made anymore. And they didn't give me the assistant that I thought I was going to get, so I'm having to do the same job again that I did as an ensign, but times 100, because I'm also the damage control assistant now. And it was kind of a tough pill to swallow. But the lesson I learned is you really can't ever take off the pack. You're an officer, you've got responsibilities, and you know, I talked about that in my last question. There's never a time when you're on that ship or you're in that job as a military officer that you can relax. Because, I mean, whether it's something as, whether or not it's someone losing their life, it could be something as ridiculous as allowing a culture where hazing happens. You can't take off that pack. And just because you know that you're great doesn't mean that your new captain knows that you're great. And I think a change in leadership sometimes can be one of the hardest things to deal with, because and I'm sure all of you guys have had to deal with this before, had it made with the old captain or the old boss, now you've got a new boss and you're like, why doesn't he trust me? Well, you're new to him too, just as much as he's new to you. So don't take off that pack. That was the biggest lesson. So.
Major Jepson.
So I've made a lot of mistakes. The one that I'll share with you tonight is, I think that a lot of it can come from the same root cause, and that mistakes get made because we forget why we're there and who we're serving. For me, it's, information and intelligence is supposed to get down to the warfighter so that he knows where the enemy is, so that he is not surprised, and so that he can get rid of the enemy with incurring the least amount of risk possible. And it's true in a combat situation, it's true in a garrison environment. And the mistake that I made was as a brand new captain, I had just come off of my first deployment, I had just finished the captain's career course, and I showed up at my second duty assignment to be a battalion 2, and I thought that I was amazing. And I was doing my ninja routine through my inbox and just slaying emails like it was nobody's business and kicking stuff back and I've got this, it's no problem. and CCing my boss the whole time because he wanted to know everything that was going on. And he comes into my office and he like, I need to speak to you right now. Come in here. And then proceeded to put me in my place because what I had been doing was not coordinating with other staff members. I was asking the warfighter, I was asking the companies below the battalion staff for information that already existed at the staff level. So what I was doing was making their job harder and making mine easier, which is not what a staff officer is supposed to do. You're supposed to take the weight off of those guys so that they can focus on training and leadership, and you are supposed to do all the coordination at the higher level. So that was a very good lesson for me, and it's something now, and I think it also comes down to laziness, or just, what is most convenient for me is not to get up and go to somebody else's office and go get that information, even though I know it's up here. So what I would charge you guys with is to be proactive, and if you and pay attention when your other staff sections are talking. When other departments are up talking, you need to listen. You need to know more than just your job. You need to know what everybody else around you is doing too, because it will make your job easier. It sounds